The first light on Tatooine did not rise so much as leak, thin and merciless, through the cracks in a clay wall patched with durasteel and patience. Long before the suns themselves showed their faces above the horizon, the little room had begun to remember heat. The earthen floor held it from the day before. The patched ceiling held it from every season before that. It waited in the plaster, in the old metal braces, in the woven blankets folded tight against one wall. And when Shmi Skywalker opened her eyes, it was already there with her, as dependable as hunger. She sat up without a sound. Slaves learned to wake all at once. There was no luxury in confusion, no drifting through soft layers of sleep. A mind that belonged to someone else had to come alert quickly, or pain would rouse it instead. The room was small enough that she could see everything in a single glance. The table made from cargo planks. The niche where she kept thread and needles and the scraps of cloth she saved, because cloth could always become something else. The thin line of morning dust lying silver in the doorway curtain. The skeleton of a protocol droid propped against the far wall like a patient invalid. And beneath the curved belly of a podracer engine too large for the space and too precious for the life it had been crowded into, the boots and narrow ankles of her son. She smiled before she meant to. "Anakin," she said softly. The boots shifted. A wrench clinked against metal. Then the boy slid out from under the engine on his back, pushing with his heels, his hair already damp at the temples, his face marked with black crescents of grease where he had absently rubbed his brow. He was all elbows and bright eyes and restless intention, 9 years old and never still for long unless there was something broken within reach. "I didn't wake you, did I?" he asked. "You were trying not to," she said. "That means I was being careful. That means," she said, getting to her feet, "that you know when you're doing something you ought not to be doing before sunrise." He grinned at her, the grin that never belonged to this place. It came too quickly and burned too cleanly. Tatooine had a way of sanding away softness from everything: flesh, cloth, voices, hope. But that smile still survived as if it had been made somewhere else and smuggled into the world under his skin. "I almost fixed the intake regulator," he said. "If I switch out the coupling ring and stop Watto from using that bent converter, the left engine won't choke at full pull." Shmi crossed the room and crouched beside him. The regulator lay open between his knees in a spill of tiny parts. His hands were black to the wrist. Behind him, the unfinished droid's photoreceptors were dark, its gold-toned plating no more than a mismatched dream assembled from scavenged pieces. "You've been up all night." "Not all night, just the last part." She reached up and moved a lock of hair from his eyes. "That is usually the important part." He leaned into the touch without noticing he had done it. "If I can get the pod running smoother, Watt'll have to enter me in the Bunta Eve trial run. And if I do that, you may die faster than last year's favorite," she said. He made a face. "Mom, I'm serious." "I know." He sat back on his heels, earnestness chasing the grin away. "But I know the course. I know engines. I can feel when something's wrong before it happens. I'm better than last year." Nisi. That was true, and knowing it did not soothe her. Shmi had lived long enough to learn the difference between confidence and fate. The second one almost always arrived dressed like the first. She rose and went to the little stove, coaxing flame from a tired cell. A battered cup, a dented pot, a few spoons whose original sets had long ago been forgotten. The room filled slowly with the smell of heated grain and weak tea. Behind her, Anakin was already reaching for another tool. "Wash your hands first," she said. "They're only going to get dirty again. So are floors. We still sweep them." He sighed theatrically and went to the basin. The water was cool, only because dawn had not yet surrendered fully. He scrubbed with the kind of impatience that somehow still ended in thoroughness. When he straightened, droplets shining on his wrists, the transponder beneath the skin near the base of his neck gave the faintest hard glint where morning light found it. The sight of it caught at her like a hook every time. It was small. It was ordinary. It was the one thing in the room she hated enough to taste. He sat on the edge of the table while she ladled breakfast into 2 bowls. Outside, Mos Espa was waking by degrees. The cough of a power unit kicking over, a shouted curse in Huttese, the scrape of metal shutters being dragged upward, a distant droid belligerently reporting its own malfunction. The city never really slept. It only changed which parts of itself were suffering. Anakin blew on his spoonful, then looked at the droid in the corner. I think I can finish his vocabulary this week. You said that last week. I mean it this time. You meant it last time too. That's different. She laughed, despite herself. How? This time I'm closer. He ate 3 bites before remembering another thought. Do you think he should speak Bake first or Basic? Basic would be easier for us, but Bake makes more sense if he's ever going to work around ships. Who says he's ever going to work around ships? Anakin blinked at her. Everything should work around ships. There was no explaining to him that not all people love the things that might carry them away. Or perhaps there was, but she had never truly wanted to. Better his imagination fastened itself to stars than to the floor of a slave hovel. Better he dreamed of engines than cages. Even if dreams cut, they also kept a person from hardening into whatever owned them. A shadow crossed the curtain. It did not knock. Things with power seldom did. Watto pushed into the room in a waft of hot air and machine oil, his broad blue face pinched with irritation before he had even spoken. He hovered rather than walked, his small wings buzzing with a sour persistence that made every entrance sound like complaint made audible. Boy, he snapped, though Anakin was already looking at him. You sleep in the shop now, yes? Maybe then my customers don't stand around all morning while you play mechanic at home. I fixed the regulator, Anakin said, hopping down from the table. You fixed what I tell you to fix. Watto's eyes flicked to the engine components on the floor, and even his annoyance paused long enough to calculate profit. That converter better be worth the hours. It will be. It better. Watto's gaze dragged across the room, lingering on the unfinished droid with habitual contempt. And not more scrap dragged into my shop today. I sell junk. I don't live in it. Shmi lowered her head with the practiced angle of obedience that kept men like Watto satisfied without giving them anything real. I'll be there in a moment. Watto made a dismissive sound. A moment costs money. His eyes narrowed on Anakin. Sebulba was in last night. Says he hears I might enter you for the trial. I told him maybe. If I decide I'm tired of throwing away parts and slave boys together. Anakin straightened. You told him, maybe? Watto's mouth twitched around something that might have been amusement and might have been cruelty. I told him if you don't blow up the engines before midday, I'll think about it. Then he was gone as abruptly as he had come, drifting back into the brightening street like a bad smell joining a larger one. Anakin set his bowl down half-finished. Excitement had transformed his face so completely that for a moment he looked older than 9, not in years, but in conviction. You heard him. I heard him, Shmi said. He said maybe. He said he would think about it. That's almost the same. It is not even close. But he was already gathering tools, energy spilling from him so fast, the room seemed too small to contain it. She folded a cloth around a ration cake and tucked it into his satchel, then caught his chin gently before he darted for the curtain. Listen to me. He stilled because she never asked for stillness lightly. If he enters you, you do not prove anything to anyone by taking foolish risks. He hesitated. Sometimes that's how you win. No. Her thumb brushed a streak of grease from his cheek. That is how foolish men die and clever men leave grieving mothers behind. Something softened in him at that. Some quicksilver defiance settling into the truer metal underneath. I'll be careful. You will be alive. He considered the terms of the bargain and gave her a solemn nod, as if he were the one granting it. Then he kissed her cheek and ducked into the street. Mos Espa had fully awakened. The city sprawled low and sunstruck around the spaceport, its rounded stone buildings the color of old bone, its alleys crooked with cables and laundry, and scavenged plating that glimmered in the rising light. Merchants shouted from shaded stalls. Pit droids clattered by in wobbling processions. Jawas moved like scraps of night too stubborn to leave with the dawn. Somewhere farther off, a bantha bellowed with the long, resentful voice of a creature that understood labor better than speech. Anakin moved through all of it with the easy, darting confidence of someone born where every corner had its own danger. He knew where the paving was broken, where a merchant might toss spoiled fruit, which route the local thugs preferred when looking for easy victims, which droids were likely to panic if approached from behind. He greeted people because he could not help it. A wrinkled old woman sorting power cells outside her doorway got a grin and an offer to look at the sputtering connector on her evaporator fan later. A Twi'lek girl hauling a crate twice her size got his shoulder under one edge without him breaking stride. Even the droids seemed to brighten around him, as if they recognized someone who saw inconvenience instead of inferiority in them. Watto's shop crouched near the market's central lane, open-fronted and overflowing with every kind of thing that still had one good use hidden somewhere in it. Coils of cable hung from hooks. Disemboweled droids leaned against cracked cases. Engines half-gutted for parts sulked under tarps. The air smelled of solder, coolant, and old heat trapped in metal too long under alien suns. Watto was already in a loud argument with a customer over the price of a compression manifold. Anakin slipped past him, tied his satchel to a hook, and went straight to work on the poddresser components spread across a bench in the back. It was a machine assembled from cunning, theft, and miraculous nerve. Two great engines linked to a cockpit barely large enough for a human child, and too dangerous for any sane adult. That was what made Anakin love it. He had built much of it himself from the bones of other things. When his fingers moved over the housing, he could remember where every piece had first lived: the intake valve off a wrecked courier, the stabilizer fins from a custom skiff, the cracked but still true turbine blades discovered in a sand-buried junk field after a storm. Others saw a heap of improbable salvage. Anakin saw the shape waiting inside. The morning passed in bright, hammering increments. He worked. He listened. Watto cursed. Customers bargained. A protocol unit came in with a shorted speech matrix, and Anakin fixed it while Watto was still inventing a new price. A Bith trader complained about a repulsor's whining drift, and Anakin ducked under the chassis, tightened a linkage, and sent it away purring. Every solved problem seemed to make the day run faster. Near midday, when the heat had risen enough to make the market shimmer like something viewed through tears, he stepped out to carry a box of couplers to the front. He set it down and straightened, wiping sweat from his neck with the back of one hand. That was when it happened. The smallest thing, the kind most people would have forgotten before the dust settled. A stack of Durasteel sheets had been leaning outside the neighboring stall, lashed carelessly in the universal faith that gravity might be persuaded to wait. A frightened pit droid shot past, bumped the lowest sheet, and the whole wobbling stack began to go. A Rodian toddler sat directly in its path, cross-legged in the dirt, absorbed in the solemn business of breaking a toy and naming that creation. Anakin moved before he thought. Later, if he had been asked, he might have said he heard the metal shift a fraction before it should have, or saw the angle differently, or guessed. But in the moment, it was simpler than thought. The world slowed, clear, sharp as a blueprint. He dropped the box, lunged, and seized the little Rodian under the arms in the same heartbeat that the top sheet came slamming down where the child had been. The edge clipped his shoulder hard enough to spin him around, but he kept the toddler off the ground, turned, and took the impact into his own back. Shouts burst around him. Someone laughed in relief. The Rodian child began wailing in outrage at the interruption. Anakin set him down, breathing fast. The top sheet quivered on the ground beside him, half buried in dust. "You all right?" Watto barked from the doorway. Anakin flexed his shoulder and winced. "Yeah." He looked up without knowing why. On the far side of the lane, among the moving bodies and awnings and threads of heat, a hooded stranger stood very still. The figure wore sun-bleached desert robes, the face hidden beneath layered cloth and shadow. But there was something in the stillness that did not belong to the marketplace. Everything in Mos Espa moved with purpose or exhaustion. This stillness had neither. It was the stillness of a blade. For the span of a breath, Anakin had the strange sensation that the stranger had not merely seen what happened but expected it. Then a pair of labor droids rattled between them, and when the lane opened again, the figure was gone. Anakin stood there a moment longer than the bruise on his shoulder required. The market noise swelled back into its usual shape around him, but something had changed. He could not have named it. He only knew that the air felt measured now, as if somewhere beyond the heat and the noise, someone had just taken the first step in a long walk toward him. On Coruscant, dawn had to be invented. It came not from horizons but from towers, from the slow brightening of 1,000,000,000,000 windows, from traffic lanes turning from embers to arteries, from reflected light moving up the glass flanks of buildings that had never known night the way simpler worlds did. Far above the planet's buried stone and lost seas, morning assembled itself in layers of gold and silver and polite illusion. In the upper levels of the Senate district, a Naboo senator received visitors with the same gentle gravity for which he was admired in public and underestimated in private. He listened to worried aides speak about committee obstacles and tariff disputes. He gave measured answers. He touched one old friend's arm at the right moment and let concern soften his mouth over matters he had himself arranged to become concerning. No eye rested on him for long without leaving reassured. It was one of the greatest weapons in the galaxy and required no blade at all. Hours later, when the public duties were concluded and the last bow exchanged, he left his senatorial apartment through a private lift no official plans acknowledged. The polished bronze doors closed. The sounds of attendants and protocol droids vanished above him. He descended into shadow and secrecy until the lift opened onto stone that predated both Republic and Tower. Here there were no banners of Naboo, no carved symbols of democracy and procedure, no evidence that the man called Palpatine was anything but an ambitious provincial with exquisite manners. Here the air was cooler. The walls were cut from old dark rock shot through with metallic veins that drank the light rather than reflected it. Lamps burned low in deep niches, each flame trapped in red crystal, their glow thick as blood and wine. The chamber had no windows. It did not need them. The city above was merely scaffolding for the thing built beneath it. He removed his outer robe and hung it with careful hands. Beneath it, black layers whispered over one another. He crossed to the center of the chamber and rested both palms on the lid of an ancient pyramid of faceted stone. The object answered his touch with a murmur almost too low for ordinary hearing, as if memory itself had begun to stir. Then Senator Palpatine was gone, and Darth Sidious remained. He closed his eyes. The dark side did not feel to him like storm or flame. Those were metaphors for men who needed drama to understand power. To Sidious it was clarity stripped of sentiment, a current in which all hypocrisy dissolved. It revealed the pressure points beneath civilization, the appetites behind laws, the secret humiliations that turned idealists into servants and servants into traitors. It was not chaos. It was the deeper pattern from which weaker minds recoiled because it implicated them. He reached into it as one might reach into cold water. For a time there was only the familiar weave of the galaxy around him, the faint pulse of the Trade Federation's greed, already pliable and poised for use, the anxious mediocrity of Chancellor Valarum's allies, the complacent brightness of the Jedi Temple, irritating as a lamp left burning in an empty room. Sidious moved among these currents with intimate contempt. Then something tore across them. His eyes opened. It was gone at once, yet not gone. The dark side still rang with the brief violence of contact. He had felt presences swell and vanish before. He had sensed the dying flare of Jedi, the aborted rise of possible rivals, the accidental potency of cultists and provincial mystics. This was none of those. This had not been a mind or a will reaching out. It had been more like a wound opening in the Force and showing him light where none should have existed. Twin suns, the smell of hot metal, a child's hand closing around a falling life and turning at exactly the right instant, not from training but from instinct so pure it resembled inevitability. Sidious stood motionless, every sense sharpened now. For a long moment the chamber seemed smaller, not because it had changed, but because his future had just widened. He turned his gaze toward the far end of the room. "Come," he said. A figure detached itself from the darkness, with such silent exactness that an untrained witness might have thought the stone itself had unfolded into a man. His head was bare here. Black and red tattoos marked his face in savage geometry. Small horns ringed his crown like the beginnings of a cruel halo. He wore black layered garments fitted for movement rather than display, and there was no part of him that did not communicate readiness to kill. Darth Maul came forward and knelt. Sidious studied him a moment with the complex detachment of a man considering both beloved instrument and eventual inconvenience. Maul was what he had made him to be, rage honed into obedience, fear transformed into appetite, every pain of childhood forged into devotion sharpened on the whetstone of violence. There were no divided loyalties in him, no nostalgia, no softness. Maul had been stripped clean of everything but purpose. And yet, the Force had just shown Sidious something that made purpose look small. "There is a child," he said. Maul's expression did not change. "Where?" "Outer Rim, Tatooine." That produced the faintest narrowing of Maul's eyes. "A slave world." "Yes." "To kill." Sidious let the question hang between them long enough to become uncomfortable, because discomfort taught more quickly than instruction. At last he smiled, and it was not a senator's smile. "To learn," he said. "If what I sensed is true, the child may be of extraordinary significance." Maul did not move, but the chamber seemed to register his tension anyway, a slight darkening in the air like a wire drawn taut. "A Jedi?" "No." Sidious turned away, pacing once around the holocron. If he were already theirs, I would have felt structure around him, training, discipline. This was raw, untouched. He paused. "Unclaimed." Maul's voice stayed level through effort. "Then why not take him at once?" "Because power seen too early invites witnesses. Because the Jedi are blind, not absent. Because a sudden disappearance on a world of smugglers and slavers can still become a story, and stories travel. Because if this child is what I suspect, he must be brought into our hand with care." "Nay." Maul lifted his head slightly. "What do you suspect?" Sidious looked at him with amused patience. "I suspect that the Force has produced something unusual and inconveniently bright. Such things are always interesting. Sometimes they are useful. Sometimes they are dangerous. Often they become both." He moved to a star map projected in the air above a low black table. Tatooine glowed dim and insignificant among routes and worlds that mattered to governments. A dust mote in a sea of opportunity. Sidious touched it, and trade lanes unfurled around it like veins. "You will go alone," he said. "You will not ignite your blade unless there is no other choice. You will observe the child, confirm what he is, learn the bonds around him, the weaknesses, the means by which he may be acquired. I want no disturbance the Jedi could name, no whispers of Sith, no public blood." Maul rose in one smooth motion. "And if he senses me, then that too will tell us something." He keyed a separate transmission and watched as coded symbols unfurled. Another web of plans nested within the first. Nemoidian greed, trade routes, Naboo, Valorum's fragility. The coming crisis still satisfied him, but now it gleamed beside a second possibility, one far more elegant. "Master," Maul said after a moment, and the single word contained obedience edged with something harder. "If the child is powerful enough to interest you, then he is powerful enough to become a threat." Sidious faced him fully. "Everything that interests me is a threat." Silence stretched. Then Sidious stepped close enough for Maul to smell the resin smoke in his robes. His voice dropped, becoming almost intimate. "Do not mistake discovery for replacement. Tools are not discarded because the arsenal grows. They are tested more rigorously." Something fierce and ugly flickered in Maul's gaze and disappeared under discipline. He bowed his head. "As you command." "The scimitar is fueled. I will depart immediately." Sidious watched him turn, black cloth whispering over stone. Just before Maul reached the archway, Sidious spoke again. The child must remain hidden from the Jedi, he said. More importantly, he must remain hidden from himself for a little while longer. A being of great power formed in chains will carry those chains inward even after the lock is opened. Remember that. You are not going to fetch a weapon. You are going to study a wound. Maul inclined his head once and vanished into the corridor. When he had gone, Sidious stood alone in the chamber and closed his eyes again, not to meditate now, but to savor. Twin sons. A boy in dust. A flare of impossible instinct. A life somewhere on the edge of the Republic, unloved by law, and invisible to those who called themselves guardians of peace. The Force had laid a secret in the sand. Sidious intended to own it before anyone else knew it was there. The scimitar landed well beyond Mos Espa's regular traffic lanes, where broken rock rose out of the sand like the backs of ancient animals too stubborn to die. Maul did not approach the city directly. He moved across the desert as a local hunter might, wrapped in layered cloth that blurred the red and black of his face and hid the geometry of his body. Tatooine offended him. Its heat was stupid, its horizons repetitive, its settlements little more than collections of weakness trying to persist long enough to profit. But it had one virtue. Places this stripped made people honest in the end. Hunger, fear, greed, desperation. All of it surfaced quickly when a world gave nothing for free. By the time he entered Mos Espa, the day had grown thick and hard around the city. He wavered above rooftops. Scents accumulated instead of dispersing. Sweat, fuel, blood from a butcher's awning, hot stone, damp canvas, ozone from overstressed generators. The city was controlled by huts in the loose, predatory way such control was always exercised. Through tribute, proxies, remembered punishments, and the general understanding that nothing lawful would intervene if the local powerful wished otherwise. Maul passed under a market arch painted long ago in colors the suns had nearly consumed. He listened. A wise hunter on any world learned that information was never hidden where men claimed to guard it. It was hidden in what exhausted people complained about, in what merchants exaggerated, in what children blurted because no one had yet taught them the value of silence. Within an hour he knew where the Toydarian shop stood, what sort of junk it specialized in, how often the owner drank beyond prudence, who hated him, who owed him, and that he possessed 2 human slaves. A woman said to be quiet and skilled with machines, and a boy whispered about in racing circles with equal parts mockery and awe. The awe interested Maul. He saw the child before he chose to. Power was often spoken of as radiance by fools who needed light to symbolize value. This was not radiant. It was compressed. A pressure. A furnace banked under ash. Maul felt at first as a difference in the surrounding motion, the way a predator might know which point in a herd concealed the only animal worth taking. He turned his head, and there the boy was inside the open-fronted shop, leaning over a workbench with a hydrospanner in one hand and a small droid component in the other, talking to the machine as if it might feel insult if he worked in silence. He did not look dangerous. That was the first surprise. He looked narrow-shouldered and sun-browned and too young for the knowledge in his hands. His tunic was patched. One knee had been stitched clumsily and then restitched more carefully, suggesting at least 2 economies of repair. There was grease on his forearms. He laughed at something the droid chirped back through a damaged speaker, and the laugh contained none of the caution Tatooine usually beat into its children by that age. Around his neck, barely visible against his skin, Maul glimpsed the trace line where a slave transponder sat buried beneath flesh. The second surprise came a moment later. A customer, a burly Aqualish with a face built for suspicion, slammed a cracked converter down on the counter and began shouting at Watto about cheating measurements. The Toydarian shouted back. Voices rose. Hands spread. Anger thickened toward the ordinary point where it would become hitting. The boy looked up from his work, listened for 3 heartbeats, then set down his tool and crossed the shop. Wait, he said before Watto could say anything that cost him the sale. It's not the converter. The Aqualish swung his glare toward him. "Boy, I didn't ask you." "It's the contact plate in your stabilizer housing," the child said. "If it's pitted, this'll overdraw every time. Then it looks like the converter's wrong because it overheats." The customer snorted. "You looked at it from there." Anakin shrugged. "I heard the way it whined." Watto inhaled sharply, caught between indignation at being corrected and greed at the chance to sell more parts. The boy held out his hands for the converter. After a second's hesitation, the Aqualish surrendered it. The child turned it over, ran a thumb across the casing, and tapped one finger against a seam. "See? This one's clean. If the plate inside your housing matches the noise you're making, you need a new one." The Aqualish scowled harder, which was how men often disguised being impressed. "And if you're wrong? Then Watto can keep yelling at you for free." The Toydarian sputtered. The customer barked a laugh despite himself. By the time he left, he had bought the converter, the plate, and 3 unnecessary gaskets Watto insisted he might as well take while he was there. The boy returned to the bench, and Watto glared after him with the fond exasperation a miser might feel toward a profitable vice. Maul watched without moving. Skill at machines was not uncommon. Quick instinct was not uncommon. But this combination of perception, confidence, and casual efficacy in one so young had already become unusual before the force around the child was considered. He remained in shadow as the afternoon leaned toward its hottest hour. The boy worked, ran errands, solved problems, and somehow kept smiling at beings who did not deserve it. At one point, a rusted service droid in the lane suffered a collapsed knee joint and pitched sideways under a tray of coolant cells. The tray went flying. The cells should have cracked and spilled. Instead, the boy, half-turned and not looking, caught the tray one-handed while simultaneously grabbing the droid's shoulder to keep it from hitting the ground hard enough to damage the head assembly. No calculation. No anticipation visible. Merely the correct action happening at impossible speed. Maul felt the dark side stir in him like an animal scenting blood. The woman arrived not long after, carrying a wrapped meal and moving through the crowd with the habitual economy of someone accustomed to making herself ignorable when necessary. She was older than most slaves fetched a good price for, though not old in truth. Hard years had thinned her but not diminished her. There was an inward steadiness to her that Maul disliked on instinct. People like that broke slowly, and when they did, they often taught others how to endure. The boy saw her the moment she entered the lane. His whole face changed. He went to her immediately, taking the packet from her hands before she could offer it, speaking too quickly, smiling too openly. Maul could not hear the first words through the market noise, but he did not need to. The attachment was unmistakable. It moved between them like a visible cord. She touched his cheek. He leaned into it. There, Maul thought. Power enough to alter futures and already tethered. The woman stayed only a few minutes. She spoke to Watto with proper submission, spoke to the boy with quiet authority, then turned to go. The child watched her until she disappeared into the market again, and in that watchfulness, Maul saw more than affection. He saw structure, identity. The mother was not merely loved. She was the frame around the boy's understanding of himself. To claim the child, one need not sever that bond completely. One needed only to learn how tightly it was knotted and where it could be pulled. He moved then, circling through the next lane to take position nearer the shop's side entrance. A crowd thickened around a fruit seller. A trio of local boys, one human and two Rhodians, argued over a broken macrobinocular lens. Anakin emerged carrying a crate of parts and nearly collided with them. "Kidster," he said, laughing. "You still trying to fix that thing?" "I'm trying to stop Wald from making it worse," the human boy replied. "I'm improving it," one of the Rhodians protested. "You're improving it into pieces," Anakin said. He set down the crate, crouched, and took the lens assembly in his hands. His fingers moved with unconscious assurance. One twist, one press, one adjusted wire. The tiny unit hummed back to life. Kidster's mouth fell open. "How did you do that so fast?" Anakin grinned. "I didn't do it fast. You were just doing it wrong." The boys groaned at him. They were still laughing when Maul made his test. From the awning above the side lane, a load-bearing pin protruded from a bracket weakened by rust. Maul brushed the force against it. No obvious push, no theatrical display, only the slightest guided failure. The bracket slipped. The hanging rack of metal scraps shuddered. Anakin looked up before the first piece had begun to fall. He shoved the other children backwards so hard they sprawled, then pivoted under the cascade with both arms raised. A flat panel struck his forearm, glanced off, and caromed harmlessly aside. A heavier engine casing dropped toward his head. He moved before it left the rack, ducked, twisted, and let it slam into the dirt at his feet. The whole collapse lasted less than 2 seconds. The children stared. Anakin stood breathing hard, eyes wide, as if surprised to find himself exactly where he needed to be. Then embarrassment colored his face. "Maybe stand farther from things when they look wobbly," he muttered. Kitster swore admiration in a tone usually reserved for legendary racers. Anakin looked around the lane uneasily. This time, when his gaze passed over the archway where Maul stood half-concealed among shadow and cloth merchants, it paused. Not on a face. Maul had hidden that well enough, but on presence. Instinct recognized instinct across species and training and age. The boy frowned. For one dangerous second, Maul felt something he had not expected to feel toward a child. Recognition. Not of person. Of shape. Once, long ago and mostly beaten out of memory, he too had been taken from the world that formed him and taught that pain could become purpose if directed by a stronger hand. He too had possessed a rage too large for his size and a hunger that made him easy to claim. The difference was that no one had ever loved him enough to make that claiming difficult. The boy took one step toward the archway. Maul was gone before the step landed. He did not return to the scimitar that evening until he had sent the report. It traveled on a coded pulse. No customs monitor would notice. A handful of compressed facts, beneath which the truth vibrated like a hidden blade. Found. Human male child. Approximately 9 years. Slave. Mos Espa. Untrained. Reflexes and mechanical aptitude exceptional. Attachment to mother profound. Potential far exceeds expectation. He hesitated only once before adding the final line. Possible rival. Certain prize. Then he sent it and stood beneath Tatooine's gathering dusk with the twin suns turning the city to bronze ash. While in the market behind him, the boy called Anakin laughed again, unaware that the first judgment had already been passed. Night on Tatooine was not mercy. It was merely a different arrangement of hardship. The heat withdrew from the streets by degrees, leaving stone walls warm as skin and alleys smelling of dust that had baked all day. Lamps bloomed in niches and over doorways, pockets of amber against a violet sky. Above the city, the stars came sharp and innumerable, so bright that a child could mistake them for invitation. In the Skywalker's little room, Shmi had set the lamp low to conserve fuel. Its glow gathered around the table, the blankets, the basin, the unfinished droid, and left the corners in soft obscurity. Anakin sat cross-legged on the floor with the droid's chest plate open across his knees. The unit's head tilted at an angle that gave it the melancholy dignity of something aware it had not yet been completed and was trying not to take offense. "There," Anakin said, tongue caught briefly between his teeth as he fitted a wire into place. "If your vocabulator stops stuttering now, you can thank me." The droid emitted a faint crackle but no words. Shmi, mending a tear in his sleeve, looked over the rim of her work. Perhaps he is speechless with gratitude. He'll never be speechless. Protocol droids are built for the opposite. You built him. Exactly. He flashed her the same grin from morning, but it faded more quickly tonight. He had been quieter since returning from the shop. Tired, certainly. Bruised, perhaps? Yet there was another quality under the fatigue. Some inward listening she knew too well. "You were watched today," she said. It was not a question. He looked up sharply all the same. "How did you know?" "Because you've been turning your head at shadows ever since sunset." He lowered his gaze back to the droid. There was someone in the market. Maybe. A pause. I know that sounds stupid. It sounds like you noticed something. He was just standing there. Anakin adjusted the wire with more force than necessary. Then the scrap rack fell, and when I looked again he was gone. Could you see his face? He shook his head. Did Watto? Watto doesn't see anything that isn't attached to credits. That, she said dryly, is often true. He hesitated. Mom, have you ever had a feeling that something was about to happen? Not because you knew why, just because the day felt different? Shmi threaded her needle again before answering. Yes. What did you do? Usually, she said, I kept working. He huffed a laugh at that, but the unease remained. She set her sewing aside and moved to sit beside him. The droid's empty eyes caught the lamp and reflected 2 small moons. When trouble comes, she said softly, most people exhaust themselves trying to decide whether it is really trouble. That is how it takes them by surprise. Better to be calm and ready than frightened and uncertain. Now, he leaned against her shoulder the way he had when he was smaller, when the whole world could still be addressed by leaning close to one person and trusting her voice. I don't like it. You don't have to like it. I just wish. He stopped. What? He touched the droid's exposed chest absently. I wish I knew how to fix things before they broke. Shmi turned his words over in silence, feeling their shape. Some things don't warn you, she said at last. Some do. The difficult part is learning which is which. Nah. He was quiet a long moment. Outside, somewhere down the lane, a pair of drunk mechanics began an argument and then decided laughter was cheaper. Farther away, music drifted thinly from a cantina. Reed pipes and percussion and the metallic underbeat of a city with more appetite than grace. I had a dream last week, Anakin said suddenly. What kind of dream? I was on a world that went up forever. No sand anywhere. Just lights. So many lights it looked like the stars came down and got trapped in buildings. He frowned. And there was this voice. Her arm tightened a fraction around him. What did it say? I don't remember. He looked frustrated by the failure. Not really. Just that it knew me. She said nothing for a moment, and in the pause the lamp crackled faintly. Dreams are tricky things, she said. Sometimes they're true. Yes? Do you think that one was? She chose honesty because he always knew when she did not. I think some dreams are doors, but not everything behind a door is meant to be entered. He absorbed that, dissatisfied but thoughtful. Then, because he was still a boy and not yet a symbol in anyone else's design, he returned to the droid and held up a thin metal strip in triumph. There, he should be able to say hello now. He pressed the panel closed. The droid whirred, head twitching once, and then in a halting, over-formal voice announced, I am C-3PO, human-cyborg relations. How may I be of service? Anakin whooped. Shmi laughed outright, the sound filling the room so fully that for a moment there was no room left for fear. Across the city, in a cantina thick with smoke and spilled liquor, fear had a different shape. The establishment squatted half below street level, its entrance marked by a torn awning and 2 guard droids too under-maintained to frighten anyone competent. Inside, the air held the layered staleness of a place where bargains were made by beings who trusted neither memory nor sobriety. Gambling tables crowded the floor. Music from a 3-piece band fought a losing battle against shouted odds and private threats. Oil lamps made every face look treacherous, which improved some of them. Watto floated above a game table near the back, one wing buzzing erratically from drink and excitement. Opposite him lounged Sebulba, broad and ugly and pleased with himself in the way beings often were when they confused survival with superiority. 2 local mechanics hovered nearby, laughing whenever Sebulba wanted them to and not 1 second sooner. Maul sat at the next table with a cup he had no intention of drinking from, his hood shadowing most of his face. He had entered earlier by a side door, placed a handful of local currency on a game, lost it without caring, and become invisible in the quickest way possible by appearing interested in vice for its own sake. "The boy's too small," Sebulba was saying with delighted malice. "One sharp turn and he'll fly out of that little tin box you call a pod." Watto bared his teeth. "My boy pilots circles around your brain-dead engines. Your boy pilots because he doesn't know enough to be afraid. That's why he's faster." Sebulba's laughter came wet and mean. "Or stupid." Watto took the insult because profit might yet come of it. "I'm entering him in the trial, maybe the race too. Then we'll see who laughs." One of the mechanics whistled low. "That much risk? You must be hurting, Watto." The Toydarian's eyes flashed. "I'm hurting because half this city owes me money, and the other half keeps breaking what it buys." Sebulba leaned back, savoring the moment. "You're hurting because you wager like a fool." That landed close enough to truth that Watto's hand twitched toward the table's edge. "I'll make it back. With the boy. With what the boy wins." Sebulba snorted. "If he lives." There it was. The fracture line. Maul listened without looking like he listened at all. Over the next half hour he learned far more. Watto had indeed been betting badly. First on off-world shipments delayed by tariff disputes. Then on a local race he had thought fixed in his favor. He owed money not directly to Jabba. Small men almost never did. But to a broker whose protection wore Hutt insignia and whose patience had begun to narrow. Watto's inventory was leveraged. His shop, his incoming parts, even one of his warehouse bays was already spoken for, if he failed to settle within the week. The slaves were not yet listed among the collateral. That could change. Sebulba eventually rose, muttering something about not wasting more good drink on bankrupt insects, and left with his entourage. Watto remained, hunched over the table with the fierce inward stare of someone counting debts, as if arithmetic alone might redeem him. Maul moved then, taking the vacated seat without asking. Watto looked up irritably. "Game's full." "Not anymore," Maul said. The Toydarian squinted. "You're not local." "No." "Then you don't know the odds." Maul set a small metal token on the table. It bore no currency mark, only the stylized imprint of a Hutt seal burned dark into the surface. Watto's expression changed at once. "Where did you get that?" "I represent an interest," Maul said. "One currently reviewing your obligations." Watto's gaze flicked around the room as though creditors might have emerged from the walls. "I'm good for them." "You are solvent for 3 more days," Maul said. "Perhaps 4, if Sebulba crashes before collecting." Sweat appeared along Watto's scalp ridges. "Who sent you?" "A buyer of sorts. I'm not selling the shop. Everything is for sale when the alternative is confiscation." Watto made a disgusted sound and leaned back. "What do you want?" Maul let the silence answer first. Toydarians, annoyingly, were resistant to the lighter manipulations of the mind. It was one of the reasons beings like Watto survived in violent economies longer than they deserved. They could be frightened, bribed, cornered, pressured, outplayed. They could not simply be bent. So Maul did what Sidious had instructed. He used the world as it was. "I want information," he said. "And perhaps later a specific asset." Watto's eyes narrowed with suspicion sharpened now by fear. "What asset?" "The boy." For the first time that night, Watto's surprise was real enough to eclipse calculation. "Anakin?" "Yes." Watto barked a short laugh. "What's a debt collector want with a slave child?" Maul's gaze did not change. "Not your concern. He's worth more than you think. I know exactly what he is worth." That, more than the words themselves, unsettled the Toydarian. Watto hovered a little higher, then lower, unable to decide whether indignation or caution should prevail. "No," he said at last. "The boy races for me." "Perhaps one more time." "No." Maul tapped one gloved finger beside the Hutt token. "You mistake negotiation for permission." The cantina seemed louder suddenly, then quieter. Watto wet his lips. Whatever he saw in the dark between the folds of Maul's hood was enough to make him look away. "I'll pay," Watto muttered. "Dough." Watto's shoulders slumped under invisible arithmetic. He knew as well as Maul did that the boy was his best chance to recover losses. He also knew that chance and certainty were different species of animal. Maul rose. "The race will go forward. Your debt will remain. When it is done, we will speak again." He turned to leave, then paused just long enough to let the next sentence sink in with proper weight. "If you attempt to hide the boy," he said, "I will know before you do." When he stepped back into the cooling night, the stars above Mos Espa looked like punctures in black metal. Somewhere in the city, the child's laughter had gone quiet. Somewhere else, the first pieces of his cage were already being rearranged by hands that had never touched him. The storm came in from the Jundland reaches in a bruised wall just before sundown the next day, moving low and fast enough that people in the street first mistook it for a flaw in the horizon. By the time the wind hit the city, market awnings were snapping hard against their poles and loose sheets of scrap were banging like drums against stone walls. Tatooine respected nothing, but it seemed to take special pleasure in destroying whatever poor beings thought they had secured. Anakin had spent the afternoon in the rear bay of Watto's shop taking apart the left engine assembly and rebuilding it with a desperation that kept time better than any chronometer. He had barely noticed the change in light until Watto started screaming for everyone to drag the more valuable parts indoors. Then the sky beyond the lane went copper black, and the first wave of grit came skimming along the ground like a living thing. "Go home," Watto shouted over the rising wind, "and don't let the sand get in your head. I need you breathing tomorrow." "Nunti." Anakin threw a tarp over the workbench, locked down the tool case and ran. The streets were already half empty. Merchants hauled shutters down with frantic speed. Droids trundled for shelter or were abandoned to weather it. Doors slammed. A flock of tiny pale birds shot across the lane in panicked silence and vanished into the darkening air. Shmi met him halfway with a cloak wrapped tight over her mouth and nose. She had come because of course she had come. Storm or no storm, she would not trust Mos Espa streets with him if she could help it. "I told you to stay inside," he shouted when he reached her. "And I knew you would say that," she called back. The wind ripped half the words away. He took her hand anyway, and together they pushed into the lane that led toward home, bent forward against the blast. Sand stung every exposed inch of skin. Dust under eyelids, into sleeves between teeth. The whole city became sound and abrasion, and dim orange light smeared into moving haze. They had nearly reached the narrow passage behind the parts market when Anakin stopped so abruptly that Shmi almost collided with him. "What is it?" He did not answer at once. Something had changed in the storm's noise. Not lessened. Nothing could lessen it, but altered. Beneath the shriek of sand on stone and the metallic banging from somewhere above, he heard another rhythm. Footsteps. Several. Too measured to be people simply running for shelter. "Back," he said. Shmi's grip tightened on his wrist. "Anakin. Back." 3 figures emerged from the haze at the mouth of the passage, faces rapt, goggles dark, movement purposeful even in the storm. Not locals hurrying home. Hired muscle. One held a shock staff. Another carried a compact blaster under his cloak, thinking the weapon concealed simply because nature was loud. Anakin's heart slammed once, hard enough to hurt. He knew them, not by name but by type. Men Sebulba hired when sabotage required deniability. Men who broke components and bones with equal professionalism. "Wrong way," one of them shouted through cloth. "Hand over the satchel, and maybe you keep your teeth." Anakin had no satchel. The lie told him what mattered. They were not after him for theft or convenience. They were after parts, or more accurately, the racer no one wanted him piloting tomorrow. The man with the staff took a step forward. Anakin's mind did something strange. Later he would remember the next few seconds in separate pieces, impossible to fit together by ordinary sequence. He remembered seeing a loose cargo crane boom above them, its chain whipping in the wind. He remembered noticing the frayed strap on a stack of plating wedged beside the passage wall. He remembered hearing the blaster come free of cloth before he actually saw it. All these details arrived together, as if the world had suddenly ceased being a blur of crisis and become a machine whose moving parts he could read. "Down," he said to his mother. He shoved her backward just as the first blaster shot cracked through the storm, the bolt going where her chest had been. He snatched up a length of salvage cable from the ground with his free hand and whipped it upward. The hook at its end caught the flailing crane chain above them. A hard yank, a pivot, the chain jerked sideways. The boom swung. Its loose cargo, 3 heavy engine cowls, slammed into the alley mouth. One thug went down screaming. Another stumbled clear. The third, the one with the blaster, raised it again. Anakin didn't think. He moved. He grabbed the plating stack's ragged strap and pulled. The whole pile toppled toward the shooter. The man cursed and threw himself aside. The blaster bolt went wild, bursting against stone. Shmi had already dragged herself to one knee. Anakin threw his body in front of hers as shards sprayed the passage. The thug with the shock staff lunged through the dust, furious now. Anakin saw the strike an instant before it came. He sidestepped. The staff cracked sparks against the wall. He swung the salvage cable low, tangling the man's ankles, then yanked with every bit of frightened strength he possessed. The thug hit the ground face first. "Run!" Anakin shouted. But the storm had turned the world into a maze, and the passage behind them was suddenly alive with more flying debris. Shmi caught his arm instead of fleeing. Together, the blaster man rose from behind the fallen plating, coughing sand. He leveled the pistol. Then something unseen pulled the weapon downward just long enough for the bolt to punch harmlessly into the ground. Anakin did not notice what had done it. He only saw the opening. He seized his mother's hand and plunged deeper into the side passage as the storm howled around them and curses chased after. The route twisted twice, narrowed, and opened into a service court littered with broken droids and empty containers. He knew the place. He knew the door on the left jammed from the inside unless you lifted then pushed. He knew the old generator housing in the corner would break line of sight for 2 precious heartbeats. They made the door. He shoved. It stuck. For one instant, raw panic flooded him so violently, it went white. Then the latch gave. They stumbled into darkness just as another bolt scorched the frame behind them. Inside, the room smelled of old lubricant and disuse. Anakin slammed the door. Shmi dropped the bar across it. For a moment, they did nothing but breathe, bent over, lungs burning with dust and terror. Outside, feet pounded past, slowed, then kept going. Either the attackers had lost them in the storm or decided a dead pilot tomorrow would be easier than a dead one today if no evidence could be tied to them. Eventually, even the pounding wind began to seem louder than pursuit. Shmi straightened first. Her hands were shaking. When she reached for him, he realized his were too. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head. Then, because it was true enough not to need courage, he said, "I knew where they were going to move." She looked at him, and in the dark service room that gaze felt unlike any gaze he had ever received. Not fear, not surprise alone. Recognition of a mystery she had sensed for years and never named. "We'll talk about that later," she said quietly. Outside, on the roofline above the passage where the storm still tore at every edge, Maul stood with his robes snapping around him like black banners cut from night. He had arranged the attack through intermediaries so far removed from him, they did not know whom they served, only that Sebulba would appreciate misfortune striking a rival pilot. He had intended to observe under pressure, perhaps intervene only if the child's death became truly likely. What he had seen exceeded expectation. The boy had not called on the Force as a trained adept did. There had been no deliberate reach, no conscious shaping. He simply moved inside its current as naturally as another child might move through shallow water. Instinct became action before thought could interfere. Worse, better, he had done it not for glory or anger but for the mother. Attachment, Sidious had said. A handle. Maul touched the comm unit concealed in his sleeve. The signal lanced through storm and static toward the waiting ship beyond the city. Sidious answered at once, his holographic image resolving in a dim field of blue against the darkness under Maul's hood. "Well, he is confirmed," Maul said. "The power is greater than we believed." "Describe." Maul did briefly. "The precision. The speed. The way the child's fear sharpened him instead of paralyzing him. The way the mother anchored it all." Sidious listened with hood lowered, his expression that of a man receiving inventory on rare poison. When Maul finished, the corner of Sidious's mouth moved. "Excellent," he murmured. "He is still centered on the mother. That is to our advantage. He may die in the race if I leave him here. Then do not leave chance in charge." Sidious's image flickered once, blue light cutting planes into his face. "Acquire the debt. Let the race proceed. Victory will increase the Toydarian's dependence and the boy's value. Afterward, take him lawfully if possible, forcefully if necessary, but without spectacle. I want him leaving Tatooine under the illusion that departure is opportunity, not theft." Maul's jaw tightened. "And the mother?" Sidious regarded him with faint amusement. "Alive. For now. The chain is more useful intact than severed." He cut the transmission. Maul looked down through the thinning storm toward the lane where the boy and woman still hid together behind a barred door. For the first time since arriving on Tatooine, he felt something close to anticipation rather than mere assignment. The child had survived a test. The next one would be public. And after that, the cage door would open. Not because mercy had found him, but because a darker hand had finally chosen to close around what it wanted. That morning the storm had moved east, leaving Mos Espa scrubbed raw and irritable. Sand lay in every seam. Awning ropes had snapped. One merchant's entire stall had migrated 3 streets over during the night and was being argued over by 2 new owners before dawn fully broke. The city did not linger over disaster. It stepped around it and resumed trade. Race day changed the city's pulse. Bunta Eve always dragged spectators out of every shade hole and gambling den within travel distance. But this year the anticipation carried a sharper edge. Word had spread that Watto's human slave boy would run. Some said it as mockery, others with curiosity. A few with the hungry excitement reserved for calamity people hoped to witness from a safe distance. Anakin had barely slept. His body carried bruises from the storm, and the left side of his shoulder still ached where the durasteel sheet had clipped him 2 days before. But exhaustion had no authority over the fever in his blood. He moved from task to task with the intensity of someone trying to stay ahead of his own thoughts. The Podresser stood in a maintenance bay near the starting grid, its twin engines gleaming in places where old metal had been polished and filthy and all the others that mattered less. Mechanics swarmed around larger, more reputable machines nearby, shouting in 6 languages. Pit droids scuttled. Steam hissed. Fuel stung the air. Somewhere, a beast of burden bellowed in protest at being included in civilization again. Watto hovered at the nose of the pod, clutching his betting slate like a holy relic. "Not too rich on the mixture," he told Anakin for the 3rd time. "And watch the coolant temp on the 2nd straight, and don't challenge Sebulba on the inner wall unless he gives it to you." "He won't give it to me." "Then you don't take it." Anakin slid under the right intake and tightened a coupling. "If I don't take openings, I don't win." Watto fluttered both hands in agitated despair. "You sound like a gambler." "I already am one of those." From 2 bays down, Sebulba's laughter carried over the noise. The Dug stood beside his own far more expensive racer while attendants worked on it. He was not looking at the machine. He was looking at Anakin with the lazy cruelty of a predator, confident the prey would eventually wander into its mouth. "Toydarian," Sebulba called. "If the boy lives past the first canyon, I'll buy you a drink." Watto bared his teeth. "If he finishes ahead of you, you'll buy me a hanger." Sebulba's grin widened. "If he finishes ahead of me, I'll eat my engine." Anakin straightened and wiped his hands on his tunic. He did not answer the Dug. It was not restraint exactly. It was concentration. The racer mattered more than the insult. Shmi arrived carrying a canteen and a small cloth packet of food no one would eat until after the start. She moved through the bay with a calmness that seemed almost unreal amid the noise. Only Anakin knew how hard she had slept the night before, how many times she had risen to check the door, how often her eyes had gone to the horizon, as if she might still find the shape of the unknown watching there. He took the canteen from her and drank. The water tasted faintly of metal and plastic and relief. "You should be in the shade," he said. "I will be, in a moment." Watto groaned theatrically. "Not sentiment now. Sentiment loses races." "You lose races," Shmi said without looking at him. Anakin choked on a laugh. Even Watto had the wit to retreat 2 feet, rather than answer her directly. When the others were briefly occupied, Shmi drew her son a little aside into the narrow strip of privacy afforded by a dangling tarp and an engine crate. "Listen," she said. "I know." "No." She put her hand on his cheek. "Listen." He did. "The race is not freedom." Something in him recoiled from the sentence because he had been feeding a quiet dream on exactly the opposite idea. If he won, Watto might profit enough to be pleased. If Watto was pleased, there might be favors. Better food, fewer beatings in the quarter, more time for his projects. Someday perhaps more than that. He had not named the fantasy because naming it made its poverty visible. "I know that too," he said, but not convincingly. Shmi's eyes searched his. "Whatever happens out there, remember who you are before anyone tells you what you've become." He wanted to say something brave and easy and childish enough to make her smile. Instead, he found himself asking, "Do you feel it too? The strangeness?" He nodded. "Yes." His stomach knotted. "Maybe I shouldn't race." The words startled them both. Not because they were cowardly. Anakin had never feared speed, but because he had reached them at all. Shmi almost told him to leave. Almost said they would walk away from the bay, from Watto, from all of it, and figure out consequences later. But the transponder at his neck was still there. Watto still owned their hours, their shelter, their bodies in the brutally technical sense that mattered most. There were many forms of courage. Most were not large enough to break an explosive collar. Before she could answer, a voice came from behind the tarp. Wise doubt. Both of them turned. The hooded stranger stood at the edge of the bay where shade met sun, desert cloth wrapped high over the face. Anakin recognized the stillness before he recognized anything else. The market. The fallen scrap. The feeling of being measured. Watto, mercifully, was on the far side of the pod shouting at a pit droid. Sebulba was busy entertaining admirers with vulgar predictions. For one suspended moment, the three of them occupied a small private world inside the public chaos. "Do I know you?" Anakin asked. "No." "Then why are you talking to us?" The stranger's gaze settled on the pod, then on the boy. "Because you intend to outrun machines built for men who have forgotten fear, and I wish to see what sort of child believed that possible." "Possible isn't the same as difficult," Anakin said. The hood inclined slightly, as though in acknowledgement of an interesting answer. Shmi stepped half in front of her son, subtle but unmistakable. "We're busy." "Yes," the stranger said. "You are." He should have left then. Instead, he added, "There are worlds where skill is not owned by the lowest bidder." Anakin stared. The words struck some bright internal place so exactly that they hurt. Before he could respond, the stranger was turning away, absorbed at once into the moving bodies and engine smoke beyond the bay. "Wait," Anakin said. But the figure was gone. Shmi's hand closed around his wrist hard enough to anchor him. "No." "Mom, who is he?" "I don't know. He knows something. That is what worries me." The summons to the starting line boomed across the paddock before either could say more. Race officials bellowed assignments. Engines began to scream to life one by one, turning the air into a physical force. Spectators packed the stands and temporary view platforms. Locals, off-world gamblers, mechanics, gang runners, tourists foolish enough to confuse danger with authenticity. Above them all, on a raised dais, under an awning thick with embroidered grime, Jabba the Hutt settled his bulk among attendants and sycophants, one huge eye half-lidded in bored appetite. Anakin climbed into the pod. The cockpit was barely large enough for him, which was one of its advantages. He cinched the harness, ran the start sequence in his head, laid his hands on the controls. The world narrowed beautifully. Noise became data. The crowd ceased to be people and became weather. The racer beneath him was no longer assembled metal but extension, intention, appetite. He could feel every inconsistency in the engines through the frame. Watto leaned in one last time, sweat rolling down his face. "No heroics," he shouted. Anakin grinned despite everything. "You entered the wrong pilot." The Toydarian made a strangled sound and fluttered backward. On the far end of the starting grid, Sebulba revved his engines with obscene confidence. Along the stands, bettors shouted final odds. Dust blew in low streamers across the open ground. Shmi stood where he could still see her, one hand pressed against the scarf at her throat. Beyond the rows of faces, higher in the shadowed seating beneath a cracked stone arch, the hooded stranger had returned. He did not cheer. He did not move. He simply watched. The start signal flared, and every engine on the line tried to tear the sky open at once. The launch hit Anakin like impact and liberation at once. For a breathless instant, the pod did not move. Sebulba's racer leapt forward in a scream of power, followed by a pack of engines that turned the line into chaos and dust. Someone clipped a support post. Something exploded off to the left. The crowd roared with the delighted cruelty only safe spectators ever achieved. And Anakin, gritting his teeth, slammed his palm against the right side ignition housing because he knew before the panel readout told him that the intake had flooded. "Come on," he hissed. The engine coughed. He adjusted the fuel mix by feel, cut the choke, kicked the stabilizer, and the pod lunged so violently the harness bit deep into his shoulders. Sand and smoke vanished behind him. The delayed start lasted only seconds. In racing time, that was an accusation. He chased. The opening stretch across the flats was brutal, pure acceleration under twin suns already climbing toward their worst intentions. Engines howled. Control vanes trembled. The course markers blurred into color and heat. He threaded between two heavier rigs, taking a line so close to one engine nacelle that the wash made his own pod shutter sideways. He corrected instinctively, barely aware of the motion. Ahead, the pack compressed into the first canyon approach. This was where men forgot they were mortal. Rock walls rose hard and sudden from the desert, narrowing the course into turns too fast for caution and too public for prudence. The leaders dived in. Sebulba held the inside with malicious perfection, daring anyone to challenge him. A Trandoshan on the outer line clipped stone and cartwheeled into sparks. The crowd's roar came back to the racers as fractured echo. Anakin saw spaces where others saw only death. It did not feel brave. It felt obvious. The canyon had its own logic, every bend a sentence already written if one looked correctly. He dipped left, used the wake off a larger racer to sling himself inward, then cut power half a beat sooner than instinct should have allowed and rode momentum through a gap between Sebulba's rear stabilizer and the canyon wall. Stone screamed inches from his right shoulder. A shower of grit rattled across the cockpit. He was through. Voices from childhood, Watto's complaints, mechanics' curses, Shmi telling him not to climb where the roof could give way, had taught him something subtler than obedience. They had taught him that everything in the world had stress points. Push them correctly and doors appeared where others found walls. The canyon opened onto a salt flat, riddled with ancient fractures. Two racers ahead of him tangled lines and spun apart in a spray of metal. Anakin went between the wreckage by a margin so slim he could smell burning lubricant on the wind from their engines. His readouts flickered. The left thruster ran hot. He listened to it with half his mind and adjusted trim. A shadow crossed the course. Tusken Raiders. They stood along a rock shelf at the far end of the flat, robes snapping, rifles braced on the ledge. The first shot cracked harmlessly wide. The second took a scoop off a trailing engine cowling somewhere behind him. The third was coming for him before it had been fired. He knew that with the same impossible certainty that had let him save the Rodian child and dodge the alley blaster. He dropped his pod a fraction, almost scraping the ground, and the bolt hissed over his head into the racer behind. The pack scattered. One pilot veered too sharply and lost a control rod. Sebulba, farther ahead, drove on without deviation. He had raced this course enough to know that panic killed more reliably than Tuskens. Anakin's heart hammered. The heat inside the cockpit became a living thing. His hands were steady anyway. Out on the stands, Shmi had long since ceased to recognize the line between prayer and terror. The machines were too fast to identify once they vanished into distance, then too sudden when they reappeared in bursts between canyon mouths and marker pylons. Each time one pod flashed past the central rise, she found herself searching for the wrong things. The tilt of a helmet, the color of a scarf, anything human in a storm of speed. Watto beside her was shouting numbers and odds at no one. Around them, gamblers screamed the names of pilots as though invocation could alter physics. Higher in the shadowed tier, Maul watched without blinking. Others saw a spectacle. He saw a revelation. The boy raced as he lived, not by submitting to the world's brutality, but by reading it faster than it could crush him. Fear sharpened him. Pressure clarified him. There was joy in him too, infuriatingly clean. A fierce exultation that rose every time the pod answered his touch exactly as he imagined it should. Maul understood the exhilaration of danger. He did not understand pleasure uncontaminated by cruelty. Watching the child, he almost began to. Ahead on the course, Sebulba made his move. The Dug had held position near the front long enough to let lesser pilots exhaust themselves trying to pass him. Now, approaching the deep ravine section where the track broke into a slaloming descent between narrow spires of stone, he drifted deliberately outward, blocking the cleanest entry line. Another racer tried the gap anyway. Sebulba's side turbine clipped the nose of the machine with casual malice. The racer spun, clipped rock, and became an expanding flower of orange fire. The crowd roared. Anakin saw the attack, saw the surviving pilot eject too late and vanish into smoke, and for one hot, furious instant, hatred lanced through him so hard his vision tightened. Sebulba had not merely raced to win. He had chosen to kill because killing was convenient. The emotion should have made him reckless. Instead, it became fuel. The world narrowed further. He felt the shape of Sebulba's engine wash, the arrogance in the line he took, the one place the Dug believed no one small enough and mad enough would dare appear. Anakin cut through a side chute between two rock teeth so narrow the pod's struts sparked on both sides. The force slammed him sideways in the harness. Warning alarms screamed. He ignored them. The chute spit him back onto the main line almost level with Sebulba's rear quarter. The Dug twisted in his cockpit and saw him. Even through goggles and distance, Anakin recognized disbelief. Sebulba swerved hard, trying to force him into the ravine wall. Anakin dropped lower, skimming the lip of a sheer descent where broken machines from older races still lay half buried in the sand below like bones under skin. The left engine shrieked. The control yoke fought him. For one impossible second he drove by feel alone, nothing existing but stone, heat, noise, and the pounding certainty that he was exactly where he should be. Then, he surged past. The stands erupted. Watto emitted a sound no living language had prepared for. Shmi could not breathe. Maul's fingers tightened once around the railing before him. The final lap became a gauntlet of failing machinery and exhausted judgment. Racers dropped away. One engine burst apart in midair. Another pilot clipped a marker and lost a vein. Sebulba, enraged, drove as though hatred alone could close distance. He nearly did. On the long straight before the finish, he came screaming up on Anakin's flank, one engine belching smoke, and slammed toward him with all the murderous intent left in his machine. Anakin smiled. Not because he wanted to die. Because he saw it. Sebulba's damaged coupling had been vibrating loose for half a lap. The Dug knew it, and was gambling that he could finish before it failed. Anakin felt the rhythm through the air between them, a flaw beating time like a cracked heart. He feathered his speed for half a second, luring Sebulba harder into the strain, then burst forward at the exact moment the coupling sheared. Sebulba's right engine tore free in a blossom of sparks and flame. The pod fishtailed. The Dug vanished sideways in a storm of fire and sand, swearing a curse the whole arena seemed to hear. Anakin crossed the finish line alone. For a fraction of a second there was silence, true silence, the kind that happens when disbelief reaches the body before sound. Then the entire arena detonated into noise. He could not hear any individual voice through it. He barely heard himself. The pod was still screaming under him, trying to outrun the fact of triumph. He cut the engines in staggered sequence, fought the drag, and brought the racer skidding wide through a cloud of dust that glittered gold in the sun. He had won. He sat there strapped into the cockpit, breath ragged, hands trembling now that they were no longer needed. The crowd was on its feet. Figures ran toward him from the paddock. Watto, astonishingly, was among them. Half flying, half tumbling with joy gross enough to be almost childlike. Shmi was coming too. Slower only because terror had to release her before relief could move her legs. Anakin laughed. He could not stop. Then, in the instant before the crowd swallowed him, he looked up toward the shadowed arch in the stands. The hooded stranger was still there. No applause. No surprise. Only that same impossible stillness while every other living thing around him shook with excitement. And though the face remained hidden, Anakin knew with unnerving certainty that the stranger had expected this victory with greater confidence than even he had. The feeling lasted one heartbeat. Then people crashed in around the pod. Watto was screaming about odds and credits and genius. Mechanics pounded the racer's frame. Someone hauled Anakin half out of the cockpit and then set him down again because he was too valuable to drop. Shmi reached him at last and seized his shoulders with both hands as if to confirm he had not become light and vanished. "You're alive," she said, and her voice broke on the simplest part. "I won," he said stupidly. "I know." Behind them, near the private exits where creditors waited as faithfully as crows, a hut broker in layered robes watched Watto celebrate and made a note on a slate. Up in the shadowed stand, Maul turned away before the cheering finished. The race had told him all he needed. The boy was not simply powerful. He was inevitable in motion. Sidious would want him immediately. Victory tasted brief and metallic. For an hour after the race, Mos Espa treated Anakin like an omen everyone wished to claim. Men who had laughed at the idea of a human child on a starting line now slapped his shoulders hard enough to bruise and told anyone listening they had always known he had speed in him. Children ran beside him in the streets, shouting fragments of the race back at one another, as if language itself had become too slow and needed to be broken into engine noise. Even droids seemed to swivel their photoreceptors after him with a different kind of regard. Or perhaps that was only the way he saw them now. Everything subtly altered by the fact that something impossible had happened in front of witnesses and could not be denied. Watto was transformed most of all. He had won heavily. Not enough to become secure. The foolish never recovered all their losses at once, but enough to feel immortal for several hours. He bought drinks. He bragged. He told contradictory versions of how much of the pod he had built himself. He called Anakin my champion and my miracle, and once, slurring slightly, the luckiest investment I ever stole from Gardulla, which made Shmi go still in a way Anakin noticed, but did not yet understand. By dusk, the city had moved on to fresh appetites, as cities do. Winners were only interesting until someone else bled. Shmi and Anakin sat outside their room in the narrow lane where a trick of the walls caught the night breeze and made it feel almost kind. The stars were out. Somewhere farther up the block, a pair of neighbors argued amiably over whether Sebulba would race again this season, or spend a month cursing in a repair bay first. C-3PO stood in the doorway behind them with his hands clasped and his head tilted, listening to the world as if gathering information for a future he had not been assigned. Anakin had a strip of dried fruit in one hand and was eating it with the dazed seriousness of someone too tired to enjoy pleasure properly. A bruise darkened along his shoulder. There was a thin cut over one eyebrow from some cockpit knock he had not even felt at the time. He looked younger in stillness, and the sight of that youth after such danger made Shmi's chest ache with a gratitude too complicated to name. "You smiled," she said. He turned to her. "When?" "In the ravine, right before you passed Sebulba." His mouth twitched. "Did I?" "Yes. I think." He searched for the memory. "I think I knew his engine was going to break." "You knew?" "I felt it, like listening to a machine that hasn't failed yet but already wants to." He looked down at his hands. "Does that sound strange?" "Everything about today sounds strange." He accepted that. "I thought I was going to lose at the start." "I know. But once I got moving," his eyes lifted to the stars. "It was like the track was already there inside my head, like all I had to do was keep up with it." Shmi was silent a moment. "And the man?" Anakin's face changed. "I saw him again." She had known the answer before asking. "Where?" "In the stands." He frowned. He wasn't cheering. "That would have reassured you." "No. Duh." He considered. Maybe it would have made him seem more normal. There's value in normal things. "Not to Watto." "No," she said. "Not to men like Watto." He leaned back against the wall. "The stranger said there are worlds where skill isn't owned." Shmi kept her voice calm by effort. "And you believed him?" "I wanted to." That honesty hurt more than lies would have. She reached over and took the dried fruit strip from his hand, broke it in two, and gave half back. "Wanting a thing," she said, "is how dangerous people enter us. They come wearing the shape of what we need." "Nuggy." He watched her face with unusual seriousness. "You think he's dangerous?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because he looks at you the way buyers look at beautiful tools." Anakin's jaw tightened. "I'm not a tool." "No, but..." Her hand rose to the side of his neck, fingertips brushing the place under which the transponder sat. "But too many in this world will still try to own what shines." C-3PO, choosing that moment to prove his social timing imperfect, announced from the doorway, "It appears to me that ownership remains a deeply flawed basis for interpersonal relations." Anakin laughed despite the knot in his throat. "See? He agrees." "I am delighted," the droid said, "to have already formed sound moral conclusions." Shmi smiled, but the smile was brief. She looked past them into the lane. A feeling had settled over the evening like pressure before more weather. Not visible. Not provable. Merely there. "Come inside soon," she said. Anakin followed her gaze. "You feel it again?" "Yes." He looked back at the stars. "Maybe it's good. Perhaps." She stood. But good things seldom arrive in secret on this world. Across the city, in a back room behind a betting den that smelled of old smoke and newer fear, Watto discovered the cost of winning too late. The room was no larger than a storage closet. Its walls hung with stained fabric to hide the cracks. A single lamp burned between Watto and the broker from Jabba's Khajiit, who sat expressionless with a slate in hand. Maul stood farther back in the shadow by the door, saying nothing. He had not needed to. His presence carried enough unsaid consequence to bend the air around it. Watto was no longer drunk enough for optimism. Numbers had sobered him. "I won plenty," he insisted, though his voice had gone thin. "You saw the payouts." The broker's leku twitched with boredom. "You won enough to cover today's markers and a fraction of prior obligation. The rest remains." Watto fluttered in agitated circles. "Then extend the rest." "I'm good for it. The boy can race again." "Nah. The boy is now the rest." Watto froze. The broker placed a second slate on the table. The contract glowed faintly where local law codes and Hutt claim marks had been stamped into its surface. A debt transfer. An asset seizure option triggered by failure to settle. Perfectly legal by the standards of Tatooine, which was to say perfectly cruel. "You can't take the boy," Watto said. "He's worth more running for me than sold once. That calculation no longer belongs to you. It's bad business. That also no longer belongs to you." Watto's eyes swung toward Maul. "This is because of him." The broker did not deny it. "A private purchaser assumed the unsecured portion of your debt before the race. Today's failure to satisfy the whole amount activates his claim." Watto's face twisted. "Private purchaser? For a child? What is he? Some rich pervert from off-world?" Maul moved one step out of shadow. Watto swallowed the rest. "The boy will be transferred tomorrow at first light," the broker said. "The mother is excluded unless a separate purchase is arranged. It has not been." "No. Take the woman too," Watto snapped, desperation making him generous with other people's suffering. "She's useful, good with machines. I'll lower the price." The buyer has specified the boy. Something unreadable passed across Watto's face then. Fear, yes, but also the greedy instinct trying to understand why one slave child had become desirable enough to rearrange debts around. For perhaps the first time, he looked back across the weeks and months of Anakin's life, not as a series of profitable accidents, but as evidence he had been too stupid to interpret. "You know something," he said to Maul. Maul's expression did not change. Watto tried anger because terror had failed him. "I should have sold him years ago. To Gardulla, to a racing stable, to anybody. You think you're clever? Fine. Take him. See if he doesn't cost you more than he makes." Maul finally spoke. "He will." Watto recoiled at the certainty in the answer. The broker slid the slate closer. "Sign acknowledgement." Watto hovered in place, breathing fast through flared nostrils. Then, because Tatooine did not reward pride unsupported by power, he pressed his thumb to the glowing field. The contract accepted him. Just like that, the future changed shape. Maul left without another word. Outside, the night had deepened. The city's celebration had become ordinary noise again. He keyed a transmission to the scimitar, and then another, more carefully shielded, to Coruscant. The response from Sidious came almost immediately. "It is done?" the Sith Lord asked. "The transfer is legal by local law. The boy can be removed at dawn." "Nah." "And the mother?" "Left behind." A long, satisfied silence. Then, "Good. Grief teaches quickly. He is attached enough that resistance is certain. That is not a flaw. It is the beginning of instruction." Sidious's hooded visage leaned slightly closer in blue light. "Bring him first to the lower apartment on Coruscant. I will receive him there under another name." Maul understood. Public mask before private shaping. The old man's kindness would do what chains could not. "As you command." When the transmission ended, Maul stood alone in the alley behind the betting den while the night wind pushed sand against the walls in whispering drifts. Somewhere not far away, the boy was likely looking at stars and imagining freedom had edged nearer. By sunrise, he would learn how cruelly the galaxy allowed hope to resemble bait. Dawn returned to Tatooine as if it had not conspired with darkness all night. The first pale light found Shmi already awake and sitting beside her son's bedroll. She had not slept more than minutes at a time. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, she had stopped pretending to herself that warning and prevention were the same thing. She had spent the remaining hours memorizing the details of him. The way one hand curled near his face when he slept. The tiny scar by his thumb from a burned soldering wire 2 years ago. The lashes darker than his sun-bleached hair. The unguarded softness that vanished the moment waking life laid claim to him. When Anakin opened his eyes, she was still sitting there. "Mom?" Before she could answer, the doorway curtains snapped aside. Watto did not bother with preamble. That in itself told the truth before words did. "Get up," he he said, voice sharp with nerves. The boy's been sold. The room changed temperature. Anakin sat up too fast, still half in sleep and therefore unable for one disbelieving second to translate the sentence into any world he recognized. Shmi stood between him and Watto in one motion. Sold to whom? Watto's wings buzzed erratically. A buyer. What buyer? Don't ask stupid questions. I will ask every question I please when it concerns my son. Your son. Watto barked an ugly laugh that died quickly because he did not have the courage to let cruelty run full course under her gaze. He's going off-world. That's all that matters. Noah. Anakin was on his feet now, confusion burning rapidly toward anger. No. Watto threw up both hands. No? You think I asked? Debt got called. Contract got signed. The buyer takes the boy at first light. You said if I won... I said lots of things. This is business. Shmi's face had gone very still. That stillness frightened Anakin more than shouting would have. Take me too, she said. Watto's eyes darted away. Not part of the deal. Then make it part of the deal. It's already set. I can work. I know you can work. Then why only him? Because he is worth something you never understood, she thought, though she did not say it. She could see from Watto's sweating unease that he genuinely did not know. He had arranged his life around small greed and had wandered into a transaction larger than his comprehension. Anakin moved around her, fists clenched. I'm not going. Watto snorted but weakly. Tell it to the contract. I don't care about the contract. You will when the broker does. As if summoned by the threat, a repulsor lift whine sounded outside. Not the common rattle of market skiffs. Something quieter. More expensive. More controlled. Shmi's hand found Anakin's without looking. The hooded stranger entered the room behind the sound of his own arrival. In the cramped space he seemed taller than in the market or the stands, perhaps because there was less room for the eye to lie. Desert robes hung from him in dark folds. Dust marked the hem. One gloved hand held a data slate bearing the glowing confirmation of Watto's signed acknowledgement. Anakin's breath caught. You? Yes, the stranger said. Shmi drew Anakin back half a step. What do you want with him? The hood turned slightly toward her. What he can become. That is not an answer. It is the only one you will be given. Watto hovered near the doorway, suddenly eager to be absent from the transaction he had enabled. See? Legal transfer. Done. Everybody complains less, yes? Neither Shmi nor Anakin looked at him. Take me too, Shmi said again, and this time she put everything unnecessary aside. No pride, no bargaining posture, only truth. He is a child. The stranger was silent long enough that hope might briefly make a fool of itself. Then he said, no toy. Anakin lunged before she could stop him. He was fast for a boy. Fast enough to surprise adults, fast enough to have won races against men. Against this stranger he may as well have run at a wall built from intent. One moment Anakin was charging with all the raw, desperate strength in his body, and the next the stranger had shifted sideways, caught his wrist, and turned him harmlessly past. No violence, no flourish. Merely superior precision. Anakin hit the packed earth floor on one knee and twisted back up, shocked as much by the effortless restraint as by the defeat. Anakin, Shmi said. The stranger released him. Try again if you wish. It was not mockery. That made it worse. Anakin did not move. Not because he accepted the challenge terms, but because some instinct deeper than rage had just told him the truth. This man was dangerous in a way no street thug or racer ever had been. Danger had a frequency. The body recognized it before language. Who are you? He demanded. A messenger. For who? For your future. Watto made a strangled sound that might have been a laugh if fear had not been strangling at first. Shmi ignored them all. She knelt in front of her son and took his face in both hands. Her fingers were cold. Listen to me, she said. His eyes were already wet, though anger kept the tears from falling. I can come back. I'll run. I'll hide. I can. No. Her voice was steady by miracle. If you run, they hunt you. If they hunt you, they hurt you. You must stay alive. I'm not leaving you. You are going where I cannot follow right now. Then I don't go. Her thumbs brushed tears he had not permitted himself. You go, because surviving is not surrender. The words cut. He shook his head violently. I'll come back. I promise. I'll free you. The stranger behind them watched in silence. Somewhere inside that silence, Shmi understood with brutal clarity that her son's promise had just become useful to the people taking him. Love would not be severed. It would be harnessed. So she chose her next words with the care of someone placing her hands around a flame. Then come back as yourself, she whispered. Not as whatever they ask you to become. Anakin stared at her, trying to memorize the sentence the way she was memorizing his face. Then he threw his arms around her neck and held on with the total ferocity of children who have not yet learned there are embraces the world can interrupt. Shmi held him just as hard. Watto shifted uneasily. The stranger did not. At last he stepped forward and extended the data slate. The transponder must be transferred. Shmi let Anakin go only because she had no choice left. That was still a choice. He wiped his face angrily and stood beside her as a small medical unit, likely brought on the speeder outside, clicked into the doorway. Its scanner arm unfolded. No, Anakin said. It must, the stranger replied. Or the old owner can still trigger the device. That landed. Shmi gave the smallest nod. Better removed from Watto's control than left beneath it. The droid's cold sensor passed over the base of Anakin's neck. He flinched, but held still. A soft tone. A green light. The pain, when it came, was brief and hot, like a sting deep under skin. The transfer completed. Somewhere in the machine's memory, his ownership changed names without changing kind. C-3PO stood in the doorway behind them, photoreceptors bright with some imperfect approximation of distress. Master Anakin, he said, this development appears gravely undesirable. That almost broke Shmi where nothing else had. Anakin turned, saw the droid, and let out a raw sound halfway between laugh and sob. Take care of Mom, he said. I shall endeavor to perform all protective functions within my admittedly limited physical capacity. The stranger gestured toward the street. Anakin did not move. Shmi cupped the back of his head once, kissed his forehead, and then, because if she touched him again, she might stop being able to release him at all, put both hands flat against his chest and pushed him gently away from her. Go, she said. He made it 3 steps before turning back. She was still standing in the doorway, straight-backed, hands empty now at her sides, all her pain hidden so that his would not deepen by seeing it. He ran back anyway and seized one of her hands. Something small and hard pressed into his palm, a tiny metal component from one of his earliest repair projects, polished smooth by years in her pocket. For luck, she said. He closed his fist around it. Then the stranger led him out into the lane where the black speeder waited under the paling sky. The city was barely awake. A few early merchants glanced over, saw a legal transfer underway, and looked away again. Such scenes did not justify curiosity on Tatooine. Dust moved in thin ribbons over the ground. The suns had not yet fully cleared the horizon. Everything felt suspended between night and day, as though the world itself had not decided what kind of event this was. Anakin climbed into the speeder because there was no path left that did not require movement. The stranger took the front position. Watto remained in the doorway of the hovel long enough to confirm the transaction had physically begun, then retreated into his own relief. Shmi stayed where she was. As the speeder lifted, Anakin twisted around for one last look. He saw his mother framed in the doorway, one hand braced against the stone. He saw C-3PO behind her, gold plating dull in the dawn. He saw the lane that had held his whole life and suddenly looked too small to contain any of it. He raised his hand. Shmi did the same. Then the speeder turned, and the lane disappeared behind a curve of wall. For several streets, Anakin said nothing. Grief had moved past tears into something hotter and more focused. His hand ached from how tightly he clutched the little metal charm. At last he spoke without looking at the man beside him. "You said there are worlds where skill isn't owned." "Yes. Am I free now?" A pause. Then the stranger answered with a truth so cold it almost sounded like respect. "Not yet." The desert vanished all at once. Anakin had imagined leaving Tatooine 1,000 times, but imagination had failed him in several important respects. He had imagined the thrill of ascent and the vastness of seeing his world from above. He had imagined the stars as destinations rather than decorations. He had imagined freedom like a burst of wind through a door. He had not imagined how much space there was for grief inside wonder, or how quickly a planet could become a coin behind glass, and then a memory behind numbers. The ship waiting beyond Mos Espa was unlike anything he had seen except in torn hollows and passing dreams. Dark, sleek, and almost unnaturally silent, it sat in a hollow of rock as if trying not to cast a shadow. No markings, no chatter from dock workers, no clutter of cargo. It looked less built than sharpened. The stranger, who still had not offered a name, brought him up the ramp and through a narrow hatch into an interior of black metal, low light, and perfect order. There were no decorative surfaces, no loose tools, no smell of old engine grease and lived-in repair. Everything gleamed with disciplined utility, as if the ship would have rejected clutter on principle. The hatch sealed behind them with a sound that landed in Anakin's chest like a second loss. He spun toward it. "Wait." The stranger did not stop. "Sit. My mother will remain where she is. You said, I said nothing about immediate return." Anger surged up so fast it almost blinded him. He took a step forward, fists clenched. "You lied." The stranger turned then, and for the first time in full interior light, Anakin saw enough of the face beneath the wrappings to understand why his body had always recoiled before his mind could explain it. Black and red skin, horns crowning a skull built for war, eyes that held no uncertainty anywhere in them. Something inside Anakin dropped cold. "You're not human," he said, and hated how small it sounded. "No? What are you?" "A lesson," the man said. It was a terrible answer, and yet the ship chose that moment to shudder softly as the engines powered for departure. The floor vibrated. Tatooine's gravity, which had owned every step of Anakin's life, began to loosen its grip. Reflex overrode fury. He grabbed the nearest handhold. The stranger watched without sympathy and without mockery. "Sit." This time Anakin obeyed because the ship was moving and because terror of the unknown sky had momentarily outranked anger at the person beside him. He strapped into a narrow seat facing a small viewport no larger than a pair of joined hands. Through it, he saw rock sliding away, then sky, then the abrupt widening into something that stripped breath from him. Space. It was black and full and alive with light. Tatooine rolled below, all deserts and pale clouds and the soft curve of a world he had never before understood as whole. The suns were farther than they had ever seemed from the ground. The stars were not decorations. They were places. Anakin pressed one palm to the viewport. For a few seconds he forgot even to hurt. The stranger had moved to the opposite side of the cabin and was securing his own harness. "You have never left atmosphere," he said. Anakin shook his head. He could not make sound yet. "You will." The engines deepened. A blue tunnel of impossible light snapped around the ship, and suddenly space itself was gone, replaced by velocity beyond comprehension. Anakin gasped, recoiling from the viewport as hyperspace took the stars and stretched them into something more like thought than sight. He laughed then, one disbelieving burst he could not suppress. The stranger's eyes narrowed a fraction, as if noting this too. Hours later, or perhaps days, time aboard the ship felt detached from sequence. They emerged over a world so unlike Tatooine that Anakin first thought it another dream. It had no visible desert, no singular city, because the city was the world. Towers rose through cloud. Traffic streams blazed like moving constellations. Light covered everything. Not the hard, hostile light of twin suns, but 1,000 million chosen lights built by beings who had decided darkness should retreat wherever they lived. His dream. His stomach twisted. The ship descended through layers of air and architecture until individual spires resolved. Terraces, landing platforms, bridges strung between heights like threads of polished metal. They did not arrive at a public port. Instead, the dark ship slid into a private bay hidden deep within the base of a tower whose exterior alone seemed richer than all of Mos Espa had ever been. When the hatch opened, cooler air met him, scented faintly with rain and polished stone and something sweet he could not name. Rain itself was nearly as startling as space. He could smell water in abundance somewhere near. The thought seemed indecent. The horned man led him through corridors where every surface reflected discipline and wealth. Servants passed without raising their eyes. Droids moved silently. No one appeared surprised by the arrival of a bruised slave child from the Outer Rim. That, more than opulence, convinced Anakin he had entered a world run on hidden preparations. At last they reached a room with tall windows overlooking the endless jeweled canyons of the city. Candles burned in bronze stands, though no one needed them for light. Rugs softened the floor. Shelves held books and artifacts, and deliberate signs of cultured restraint. Everything in the chamber was chosen to suggest power that never needed to announce itself loudly. A man stood beside the window in cream and dark wine robes, his silvering hair neatly kept. His posture relaxed in the exact way only the deeply dangerous or deeply harmless ever managed. He turned as they entered. Anakin knew him vaguely. A public face from discarded news transmissions, Watto sometimes played for customers when pretending political awareness made him sophisticated. A senator. Naboo, perhaps. A voice from places where laws were made by beings who would never smell Tatooine dust unless they bought it bottled. The man smiled. "Welcome," he said, and the warmth in his tone was so skillfully measured that Anakin's guard, already exhausted, almost failed by instinct. "You have had a difficult journey." The horned man bowed his head slightly. "My lord." "Not senator, then. Or not only senator." The older man's gaze flicked briefly to him in acknowledgement before settling fully on Anakin again. "You may leave us, Maul." So, a name at last. Maul, because of course that was his name, sharp as impact, did not move at once. Something unreadable passed through his face and vanished. Then he bowed and withdrew, leaving Anakin alone in the room with the gentle stranger and a city of impossible light burning beyond the glass. "Come closer," the man said. Anakin did not. The man seemed unsurprised. "You may call me Palpatine. Surname only." Even that felt like a gift designed for small hands. "What do you want?" Anakin asked. Palpatine's expression softened with what might have been sympathy if sympathy were not so useful. "To help you. You took me from my mother. I took you from a life in which your gifts would have been exploited by small men and buried in sand." He gestured toward the city outside. "Look where you are now." Anakin hated that the sight still had power over him. He hated more that Palpatine seemed to know it. "I want to go back," he said. "Of course you do." Palpatine moved to a low table where food had been laid out. Bread, fruit, water clear enough to look unreal, something steaming in a silver bowl. Attachment does not disappear because distance is introduced. Nor should it. The sentence was strange enough that Anakin looked at him properly for the first time. Men like Watto called attachment weakness when it interfered with profit. They mocked love because love made labor unreliable. This man spoke of it as if he understood its weight and did not disdain it. Palpatine poured water into a glass and held it out. "Drink, Dyke." Anakin hesitated, then took it. The water was cold. Actually cold. It slid through him like mercy he did not trust. "Your mother remains alive," Palpatine said. Anakin's eyes snapped up. You promise? I do not give childish promises. The old man's voice gentled further, and now the gentleness was dangerous because it had truth inside it. I give conditions. Learn what I offer you, and one day you may possess the power to change not only her fate, but the fate of every person still in chains on worlds no Senate hearing will ever save. The room seemed to narrow around the words. Anakin had imagined power in simple shapes. Credits enough to buy freedom, skill enough to win, strength enough to protect one person at a time. Palpatine spoke of power as architecture, as something broad enough to hold systems and worlds. It was too large an idea for a child, and therefore exactly the sort to entrance one. What do you offer? Anakin asked, before realizing he had. Palpatine smiled slightly as if a desired door had opened on schedule. Knowledge, discipline, the means to become equal to what is already inside you. You know what's inside me. I know potential when I see it. He crossed the room slowly, stopping not so near as to threaten. I know what it is to live among institutions too weak or too corrupt to act. I know what it is to watch the powerful speak of peace while children labor in deserts for the amusement of gamblers. I know, Anakin, that the galaxy is broken. The use of his name hit with intimate force. No one had offered it here before. Palpatine continued, voice low. Some men preserve broken things because disorder profits them. Others stand before the damage and wring their hands about procedure. A rare few understand that if a machine fails, it must be taken apart and remade. Go. Anakin's hand closed involuntarily around the little metal charm still hidden in his fist. Machines. Repair. Order. Palpatine saw the movement. Of course he saw it. You understand broken things, the older man said. You see how they fit, how they might fit better. The galaxy needs such vision more than it needs another frightened child in a junk shop. Anger flared, but it tangled now with something treacherous. Recognition. The same words could be trap and truth at once. That was what made them dangerous. If I learn from you, Anakin said carefully, you'll free my mother? Freedom, Palpatine said. It is never granted. It is secured by those with the will to hold it. Then, after the smallest pause, I will not forbid you that goal. Not yes, not no. A better liar would have disguised the omission. A better fool would have missed it. Anakin was neither. Yet he was 9, exhausted, grieving, dazzled, and standing in a palace above a world he had only ever seen in dreams, while the first person here to speak gently to him had offered not comfort alone but scale. It was too much for refusal to stay clean. Palpatine gestured toward the food again. Eat, bathe, rest. No one will harm you here without my leave. Without my leave. There it was. The hidden hinge. Protection with ownership built into its grammar. But protection all the same. On Tatooine, no one had even pretended the distinction mattered. Anakin looked toward the window. Lights stretched beyond counting. Somewhere behind other walls and under other names, Maul waited like a drawn knife. Somewhere unimaginably far away, Shmi stood in a doorway beneath twin suns and perhaps looked up at a sky too bright to show the stars that now surrounded her son. I'll come back for her, he said, not quite to Palpatine, not quite to himself. Palpatine inclined his head. Then become someone who can. The sentence settled into Anakin's bones with the heavy certainty of a vow borrowed from the mouth of a stranger and mistaken for his own. He drank the rest of the water. Far beyond the tower windows, Coruscant burned with opulent, bottomless light. It looked like power made visible. It looked like the answer to every small humiliation of a slave's life. It looked, to a boy who had never held enough of anything, like abundance had finally chosen him. And somewhere beneath the silks, the candlelight, the soft words and polished floors, the dark side turned its face fully toward Anakin at last. Not with chains. Not yet. With invitation. When Palpatine left him to attendance in a room larger than his old home, Anakin crossed to the window and pressed his palm against the cool, transparent steel. The city hummed below like a machine too vast ever to fail, and the stars beyond it seemed farther away now than they had over the deserts of Tatooine. He opened his hand and looked at the little metal charm his mother had pressed into it. It lay in his palm like a fragment of the world that had made him, humble and stubborn and warm from being carried. He closed his fingers around it until the edges bit. Below, the lights of Coruscant went on forever. Behind him, in some deeper chamber of the tower, Maul waited in resentment and Sidious smiled in private. And the boy from Tatooine, taken by the Sith before the Jedi ever learned his name, stood between wonder and sorrow, and did not yet understand that the hand reaching toward the galaxy was already beginning to curl into a fist.